What's up, everyone? Welcome to Back to the Future, the podcast that takes a trip down Philly sports memory lane and asks the question, what if? I'm your host, Jim Montgomery, and I don't even know how to feel this week. This might be the longest week ever. And there's 2 weeks between the championships and the Super Bowl, but like this week is absolutely worthless. There's no football going on. It's basically people giving their way too early predictions. It's interviewing the Kelsey's mom on the Today Show. It's just like there's still Cincinnati and San Francisco fans are still bitching about the way the championship games played out, coming up with excuses. The teams that are not in it, it's, oh, well, where's Aaron Rodgers going to go? Tom Brady's retiring. Where's Jimmy Garoppolo going to go? Who's going to quarterback in Tennessee? Who's going to Las Vegas? It's just, I don't know. Like, I was so hyped up early in the week, like getting excited that the Eagles are going to the Super Bowl. And now it's just a drag. And I know it's going to pick up coming in for next week. And I'm looking forward to it. This Super Bowl, and I was talking to a couple of my friends about this. It's a different feeling than most because this is the first one since we've won one. So yeah, I'm thinking like I want to be able to enjoy it. I think there's going to be way more enjoyment in this one than what we had previously, which is good. And I am feeling confident. I'm nowhere close to being able to make a pick or anything, but I don't know. It's just like it's a long process. I get why there's 2 weeks, but man, and it really doesn't help much that the NHL was sort of, especially if you're better, like I've been doing pretty decent on the NHL this year, but like it's been gradually, Flyers haven't played since last week. There were teams that played back to back, and the All-Star game now is this weekend. So I guess there's some stuff, but man, it's brutal. So obviously the big story, Eagles are back in the Super Bowl for the first time in 5 years, which that phrase in and of itself sounds ridiculous to say. Usually there's like another number in the tens column. The fact that it's a single digit number blows my mind. The fact that it's a single digit number that they're coming off as a winner and they have the opportunity to win two within a single digit amount of years is just crazy. And I don't want to get too crazy into math, but there's usually a number in that tens column. So the fact that it's a single digit and there's no tens, it's kind of taking a hard time to get used to. But again, like I said, I'm looking forward to just being able to enjoy it and not have like the nervous energy. Obviously, I want them to win. Obviously, there's a ton of nervous energy. Don't get me wrong. But it's a whole different vibe when you finally won one. And I'm liking it. I'm going to be able to enjoy it with the kids. So there's that. Next week on Back to the Future, we're going to do our Super Bowl preview. If you want some daily Super Bowl fodder, I've been picking and choosing things all week to kind of go. I have the heavier stuff for next week. But be sure to check out This Day in Philly Sports History, which I record every day. It's usually up by like 8 o'clock, where we take a look at what's been going on that day in Philly sports history. Usually I've been dedicating a little bit of time to the Eagles. So be sure to check that out wherever you get your podcasts, like and subscribe on the YouTube channel. And for the month of February, just give one more plug to This Day in Philly Sports History. I've been taking a look at key figures, teams, moments in Philly sports Black history for Black History Month, and taking a real look at some of the stories and people that were involved. And it's not always pleasant. And we've talked the past couple days about the first Black player for the Phillies, first Black player for the Eagles, and kind of the struggles and what goes into that. Because Philly and race and sports, it's definitely a complicated history at best. So I want to just get a real look and take a dive into that. So be sure to check out This Day in Philly Sports History anywhere you get your podcast, on the YouTube channel. You'll be glad you did. All right, so here we go. It's Super Bowl week, and we've talked a lot in the past on this podcast about some of the misses, like with Buddy Ryan. Ironically enough, we did Andy Reid, who the Eagles are playing against. So be sure to check out that episode from a couple weeks ago. But the fact of the matter is, we are in the Super Bowl again for the second time within 5 years. And how do we get here? And we have a franchise quarterback who's in his second year as a starter. Lots of questions about that quarterback coming into the season. We have a first-time head coach, excuse me, in his second year who came into this season with a lot of questions. We have a GM who went out, added some key pieces via trade, free agency, and all that. And the team put it together, and things couldn't be better. Here we are in the Super Bowl. Oh, don't forget our late season quarterback injury, where we weren't sure. There was question marks about that. The team wasn't supposed to do well going into the playoffs with the number one seed. They were supposed to lose the first round, supposed to lose in the conference championship. Yet here we are. And wait a minute. Are we talking about this year or are we talking about 2017? Because the comparisons are eerily similar about just ways that season had played out. Both teams had the number one seeds. Both teams were basically not expected to, or I shouldn't say not expected. They weren't picked by a lot of people to win their first divisional game, despite being the favorites. Yet they come out on top. Neither one were supposed to move past the championship game. Yet here we are. Both quarterbacks had questions. The coaches had questions. And in honor of just being able to say that we're in the Super Bowl for the second time in 5 years, we're going to go back and take a little bit of a look at that 2017 team, but more importantly, the curious case of Carson Wentz and sort of what happened and how did we get here when in 2017 with Wentz, Foles, that team, the future was bright, yet here we are and we're back in the Super Bowl and things are completely different. So before you do anything about that team, you have to talk about how they got Carson Wentz in the first place. The moves that Howie Roseman he was able to put together, the fact that just a year or two prior to the 2016 draft, there was all the talk about Mariota teaming him up with Chip Kelly. They had the whole do the deal hashtag movement. But then you got Sam Bradford, but things fell the right way. You were able to trade Bradford. Now all of a sudden Carson Wentz is your starting quarterback. Had a solid rookie year. He was 7-9. Didn't get him into the playoffs, but he showed some promise. So then the following year, they got off to that hot start that was kickstarted by the 60-yard field goal by Jake Elliott. But they lost to Seattle. They were 10-2 after that loss in Seattle. They went out to Los Angeles to play the Rams that next week. And Wentz came in. He was having his typical game. Like, he was the MVP candidate that year. He was well on his way to over 300 yards. He had 4 touchdowns, almost a 60% completion percentage, which is basically what he did all year. And the Eagles had the lead. He was leading them to victory. And then, boom, Lucy took the football from Charlie Brown. He ran in, if you guys remember, he ran that quarterback draw in, got hit, tore his ACL, and then to add insult to injury, the touchdown got called back for a holding call on Lane Johnson. So this led to, obviously, that legendary run by Nick Foles where he came in, led us to the Super Bowl. And ultimately, Carson Wentz was never the same after that. And that's, to me, that's that moment when he got injured and the fact that they did go on to win the Super Bowl with Nick Foles. That's when things changed. And I feel as though if it wasn't for that, we might not be here where we are now. But why was he never the same? Like, what happened to Carson Wentz? And I can honestly say in Philly, we've had a pretty we've had some quarterbacks that have divided the fan base. You had McNabb, even going back to Cunningham. I remember hearing people talk about Jaworski. People didn't like when we brought in Michael Vick. Some people thought that Kevin Cobb should have been the starter, Nick Foles. So, like, there's always been that sort of division with the quarterback. And honestly, it was no different with Nick Foles and Carson Wentz. And there were people from day one that said, maybe we shouldn't have maybe we shouldn't have drafted Wentz. Maybe we should have kept that pick, built up the team elsewhere, because he was from a small school. And the knock on him was that he was injury prone. And you kind of look at the progression of his career, and it's hard to argue that he's not injury prone. Broke his wrist in college, and that was one of the bigger question marks of him when he came out. He fractured his ribs in the preseason his rookie year. He didn't miss any time, but I mean, he still got hurt. Then we had the ACL injury that he had in 2016, or I'm sorry, 2017. And then if you remember, he came back, or like he started to come back, and then his back was, his knee was fine, but he couldn't play because his back was broken. And then like Nick Foles started the season, Wentz came in, didn't really do much, but then his back somehow was broken, but it was broken before Nick Foles came back in. And then you had the 2019 season where he did play all 16 games and then got hurt in the first quarter of the playoffs with a concussion. Not his fault, but I mean, he still got hurt. I don't think he had any injuries in 2020 except for maybe a bruised ego. But he also didn't play very well. And I don't know whether that was concussion, a combination of everything. And then he hurt his foot once he was in Indianapolis in the preseason, broke his finger last year. So some of these obviously are not his fault. Like the broken finger last year, it was a freak thing. But how much can you chalk up freak things to just be like, how many freak things can happen to a person before you can say, all right, dude, you either have bad luck or you're injury prone? And I don't know. Like, I think there's some merit to the injury prone thing. But, I mean, look at what happened to Hurts. Hurts missed a couple games this year, too. I think it's just the way the NFL is this year that you need to have a good backup quarterback because it's likely your starter is going to miss some time unless you're like Tom Brady, who is like Mr. Elastic and just doesn't get hurt with the exception of the 1 year. But is that why Carson Wentz was still not the same? Was that the reason that led to all this? I don't know. But then there's some of the locker rooms issues that I feel that were never addressed by him. You had like if you remember, and people thought it was Alshon Jeffrey, but people saying that he doesn't really work in practice or he does what the coaches want him to do in practice, but then he doesn't change in the game. He's not open to be coaching. He was selfish, not a leader. People were questioning his leadership to the point where at one point Jason Kelsey and Fletcher Cox had to come out and say, no, he's a leader and this and that. And I question whether they really believe that or it was something they did just to make sure there were no waves. Was he jealous? Was there has to, I mean, I don't know. I've never been in that position, but I would think as a human being, there has to be some level of jealousy of Nick Foles from Carson Wentz because not only in the fact that he had busted his ass and worked so hard to get us to 13-1 or whatever the 13-2, the 13-2 record when they went to the Super Bowl. If it wasn't for Carson Wentz, the Eagles wouldn't have gotten there. But it's like Nick Foles came in and sort of closed it out, almost like a closer would in baseball. Everybody loved Nick Foles, though, because Nick Foles was the guy that brought the first Super Bowl. And there's no doubt in my mind at some point, take his personality things out of it, that Carson Wentz thought that was going to be him leading Philly to the first Super Bowl. And truthfully, it probably should have been. However, I feel like for the first Super Bowl, that was the most Philly way to win. But doesn't matter. We won. I don't care who the quarterback is. Like my dog could be the quarterback as long as they win on next week. But then you have, like, did he not get along with Doug Peterson? And like part of it was like this like there was a 2 year period where everything was a mess. It was like, oh well, Doug Peterson can't coach. It was all Frank Reich, and then Doug was doing this, and oh, you can't win without Frank. But was it Frank or was it Carson? And I don't know. And what did he not get along with Dougie P because Doug was trying to make him better and coach him, and because Carson was not open to coaching, that sort of furthered the divide. However, the resistance to coaching and the work ethic and the practice and all of that, that followed him to Indianapolis. They were saying almost like I was reading articles that what the people in the locker room were saying, it was identical to what people were saying in Philly. So like to me, all of a sudden, where there's smoke, there's fire. So maybe, and we talked about this, I'm going to flash back to one of our other Back to the Future episodes when we talked about Doug Peterson. Doug Peterson kind of took the hit and the fall for Carson Wentz. And then we saw once he was back with Precious, I shouldn't say Precious because he helped us win, but when he was back there with Frank Reich, all of a sudden, Carson didn't change. So somewhere along the line, somebody owes Dougie P an apology, but we'll leave that there. And then, so I think it was a combination of the locker room issues, the injuries, and then it didn't help when he got benched for Hurts. However, if you are a leader, if you're a competitor, sure, you might be pissed off as whatever inside, but you got to say the right things, especially as a quarterback. And I know it's human nature, but man, like you have to say the right things. You have to be like, all right, listen, sure, I'm going to compete. I want to do whatever I can to help this team win and make Jalen better. But I think what happened between all of the other pieces in there, he knew he wasn't going to beat Jalen Hurts out. And I think and nobody's going to tell me any different because we've seen this play out now over the past couple seasons with multiple teams, that this was not a Philadelphia Eagle problem. This was not a Doug Peterson problem. This was not even a Frank Reich problem. This is a Carson Wentz problem. And once he got benched and then the following week, Jalen comes in and beats the Saints, I think at that point we all knew it was done. And he had not, and the thing is, this is where everybody was divided, because some people wanted to give Jalen Hurts a chance. Some people wanted to say, oh, Wentz is getting not a fair deal here. But he didn't do anything to help his cause. And I think that, to me, is the anti-Wentz or the anti-Hurts people, or the pro-Wentz people, I guess would be a better way to put it. That was the issue. Like, great, you can be pro-Wentz, but Wentz didn't help himself out. He didn't come out and say, you know what, I'm going to do this and do that. And like, no, like he was just a dick about it. So to me, I mean, you got to think about this. All started when he blew out his knee. So what happens if he didn't blow out his knee? Do things change? And I think in the Super Bowl year, it's fair to say, I'm not sure they win the Super Bowl with him in that Super Bowl year if he doesn't blow out his knee. Sure, they were the better team. Sure, they wouldn't have had, they would have played the same teams, had the same road to the Super Bowl. But you got to remember, thinking back to that, the team rallied around Nick Foles. And they embraced that underdog mentality. They wouldn't have had the underdog mentality. There's no reason for Lane Johnson and Chris Long to pull out those dog masks if Carson Wentz is in there. And yeah, they were the best team in the league for the most part that year with Wentz. But there's something to be said about them rallying around. And you see it somewhat this year too, with everybody kind of doubting, oh, well, Jalen's this, and they're overrated. And I mean, they battled through all year. Nobody wanted to give the Eagles the props. First it was their schedule. First it was this. But they've rallied around that, and that's what they did in 2017. They rallied around the fact that they had their backup quarterback, that nobody wanted to do that. I mean, it goes back to the Jason Kelsey. We're from Philly, fucking Philly. No one likes us and we don't care. Like, the whole entire city rallied around that. I don't know if that happens with Carson Wentz in there. And I mean, granted, the way that offense was playing, Carson Wentz could have come in. He could have blown out the Falcons. He could have done the exact same thing that Nick Foles did against Minnesota. They could have gotten into the shootout with the Patriots. But I feel like in that Super Bowl, the team played looser because they went in there with that underdog. Everybody's against us against the world. I don't know if they have that with Carson Wentz. And they may have beaten the Patriots with Carson Wentz. I question whether they would have gotten there with Carson Wentz. But I mean, you definitely don't have the Philly special. There's no Carson Wentz coming up to Doug Peterson and saying, "Hey, you want Philly, Philly?" There's just no way that that's going to happen. And it could have. He was having an MVP year that year. Don't get me wrong. 3,000, almost 3,300 yards, 33 touchdowns before the injury. And honestly, like I said, he was the MVP candidate. He was on pace to just set amazing records. But like I said, I want to go back to that. And I questioned, were they going to be the same team with Wentz in the Super Bowl? And I mean, we could probably do a whole episode on that, but I don't know. I think the heart of that team was because they knew they were underdogs. You don't have that when you're going to be favored probably every single playoff game, and they probably would have been favored in the Super Bowl maybe by 3 points or less. But they certainly would have been favored against the Patriots. And I truly believe that. So did the injury break him? I know it sounds funny, but did it break Carson Wentz as we know him? And I don't know. It's one thing to say the knee injury. I feel he was never the same after the concussion. And yes, that was a cheap shot. But, I mean, you throw what's going on in his mind with Nick Foles and feeling some type of way. You throw in that he probably still is a little hesitant. He never really moved the same way after the knee injury. You throw in that kind of mindset, and then you throw in a concussion on top of that. You never know. And, I mean, that 2019 season before the year he got the concussion, I mean, he threw for 4,000 yards, threw 27 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, but more importantly, he started all 16 games. And yeah, it was a cheap shot by Clowney, but I would argue that injury was probably the worst for him, more so than the knee injury or anything like that, because I don't think he's been the same since. He's never played as well that he played in 2019 since then. And as far as the mental, I mean, he's getting over the Nick Foles thing. All of a sudden, now you have, they drafted Jalen Hurts in the second round. And that's going to be a big story you're going to hear next week. And, I mean, rightfully so, but to a certain point, what you need to understand is, did Howie see something that maybe nobody else did? But I think the piece in that is the contract extension that he had just signed. So it was kind of like you signed him to the contract, and then you're drafting Jalen in the second round. But did Howie know something about Wentz that maybe we didn't know after that concussion? Or maybe did he sort of see the writing on the wall? I mean, people blame Doug Peterson for that, but look what he did his first year with Trevor Lawrence. The man wanted to coach, and you had Jalen Hurts who wanted to be coached. And again, I feel there's something up, and people say he gets lucky, but I think Howie saw something, and I don't know what it was. And then on top of that, when Wentz was like, I want to be traded. I don't want to have to battle for my job. I don't know if he would have beaten out Hurts if you take that contract aside. he would have had a huge advantage, I think, in 2021 going against, like, trying to figure it out because of that contract. But talent-wise, I don't know the way he's been playing if he would have done that. Fortunately, Howie was able to work his magic, got him out of town. The fact that, honestly, you got anything for him, it blows my mind. But even after that, there was still like a large, maybe not so much now that they're in the Super Bowl, but heading into this year even, there was still a large contingent of anti-Hurts who backers out there who felt that they should have given Carson a more of a shot, a more of a fair chance. And some of it is due because, like, they're like, oh, Foles got lucky, they wouldn't have won anything. And it's like, well, why can't both be true? Why can't we say we were lucky that we had Foles and we wouldn't have been there without Carson? And it was just weird, like, going into the past couple of years where there was like all or nothing. It's like it's indicative of our society right now anyway, but I don't want to get into that. And to me, it's a little bit of both. And I mean, I think the leader, I don't know what happened to Carson Wentz. Was it the fact that he didn't feel the love from the the front office, excuse me, and the coaching staff? Was it he just didn't have leadership? Like, you can't teach that. He went to a Division I AA school, so he was the big fish in the little pond. Probably a lot of those guys knew they weren't going anywhere, so you have this good quarterback. He probably didn't have to do much leading. Now all of a sudden you have a diverse locker room. I don't think he was ready to handle it. Could it have been Philly? Would he have been better off going to, like, Chicago? Or I don't even know. The NFL is different. Like, it's not like Major League Baseball where the fan bases are different. But, like, play for the Los Angeles Chargers or something like that. I don't know. And, I mean, you could go any one of two different ways. And ultimately, I'm glad that he's not here only because of the way it played out. Because he was never going to be the leader. He was never going to take us there. And kudos to Howie Roseman for seeing that early and making sure he was out of there. And look at Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts is everything we wish we had in Wentz. Did Wentz probably have a better arm coming out of college than Hurts? Probably. Hurts makes up for it with his ability to run. Not that Wentz was no slouch when it came to moving around and getting things. But I feel from a leadership point, he is everything that if we wished that Wentz was. He's everything that, at this point, I wish Donovan McNabb was, for that matter. Randall Cunningham. Even Jaworski. Like, you want that guy to be able to step up. Although I don't know much about Jaworski, so that might not be fair to say. But I can honestly say if Wentz would have showed that leadership, things would have played out. And I guarantee you, because we've done an episode on this, look it up, the Donovan McNabb TO episode, if Donovan showed the leadership that Jalen Hurts showed, things would have played out differently for that. So it worked out well. But what happened to Carson? Was it the injury? Was he just not mentally ready to not be handed something? I mean, he's born and raised in North Dakota, went to North Dakota State. Probably everybody from the time he was 8 years old on up told him he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. As soon as somebody told him maybe you're not the best, he went in a cocoon and hid. And he's never been the same since that. Once he have a little bit of adversity, he shrunk. And I'm sorry. Like, that's why I also question whether or not they would have been able to win that Super Bowl with him. Because, I mean, he showed, to me, zero leadership and zero willingness to get better, to work on his shortcomings, because he probably never had to do that. Nobody probably told him anything about, oh, you got to do this, but, oh, Carson, you're the best, you're the best. And that ultimately is what you get. Now look at Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts was benched in the national championship game. Talk about overcoming adversity. Now he's in the fucking Super Bowl. That's the kind of leader. Not like McNabb, who's like, oh, I'm not getting involved. No. Hurts is like, he manned up, owned it, and said, I'm going to get better. went to Doug Peterson and said, what can I do? He even reached out to Wentz when he was there and tried to get better. So this is who we want as a leader. The fact that he is going to lead us into the Super Bowl has me ecstatic. And I'm so glad the whole Carson Wentz thing played out the way it did, because not only did we get one Super Bowl, we're on the cusp of winning a second and moving ourselves up in that club to the deluxe apartment in the sky. All right, maybe not that far yet, but the potential is there. And it wouldn't have happened if Wentz didn't get shipped out or force his own way out of town. So, I don't know. And tell me what you think. What broke Carson Wentz? Was it the knee? Was it Doug? Was it Howie drafting Hurts? Was it the concussion? Was he just a weak person that got exposed? Was he overrated the whole time? Could this have worked out somehow? Let me know what you think. Drop a comment on the YouTube, on the pod, on social media. Shoot me a text message, smoke signals, whatever. Be sure to like and subscribe. We got a lot of good stuff coming up on both of my pods, both this and This Day in Philly Sports History for the Super Bowl. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your enemies, tell your enemies' neighbors. I don't care. Just get the word out there. Next week, we're going to do our Super Bowl 57 preview. And be sure to follow me on YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter, Jimbo_Mont, Instagram at Philly Jimbo. I am on Facebook right now, so if you have Facebook, just look for me. You might see a picture or two of my kids in there, but I posted some content on there as well. But I'm anxious to hear what you think. What really is the reasoning and rationale? Why didn't Carson Wentz work here, and could it have worked out? And are we better off for having him, but now he's gone? Make sure you let me know what you think. I don't know how I'm going to get through the next 2 days without crawling out of my skin and going crazy. I'm going to have to watch the NHL All-Star game and skills competition and whatever. To be honest, I'm probably going to watch replays of Super Bowl 52 on loop until then. But until then, have a great week. Be sure to tune in for the Super Bowl preview next week. And until next time, I will see you when I see you.